Tonight, the moment of freedom. New video shows the Taliban releasing Bowe Bergdahl with the warning, don't come back. And we learned Bergdahl had walked off post at least once before. Reports from Bob Orr, Margaret Brennan, and Nancy Cordes. Vicente Arenas on the violent weather that tore across the Midwest, now heading east. There's a lot riding on California chrome. Michelle Miller gets it straight from the horse's mouth. And Mark Phillips with a veteran bringing D-Day to life.
I was scared to death, and I was shaking.
For a new generation.
It is a lot different than just reading it in a textbook. When you stand on that beach, you're just like, wow, this really happened.
This is the CBS Evening News with Scott Pelley.
Good evening. Scott is off tonight. I'm Maurice Dubois. Today we got to see for the first time how the release of U.S. Army Sergeant Bowe Bergdahl went down. The Taliban put out this video of his handover to U.S. forces last Saturday, 5 years after he was taken prisoner. We also learned more today about Bergdahl's service record in Afghanistan. We have a series of reports tonight. First, Bob Orr with the video.
With the sun setting over the mountains of coast Afghanistan, a small group of armed Taliban fighters, one of them with a white flag, stood near a silver and orange pickup truck. Inside, alone in the back seat, sat Sergeant Bowe Bergdahl. The clean-shaven captive appeared to be having some trouble with his vision. He blinked repeatedly and at one point rubbed his left eye. American surveillance planes flew overhead. Taliban gunmen, some armed with rocket-propelled grenades, stood guard on nearby hills. Then the sound of approaching helicopters signaled the start of a carefully orchestrated handover. Bergdahl, dressed in traditional Afghan garb, was flanked by 2 Taliban soldiers. As the Special Operations Black Hawk touched down, kicking up a cloud of dust, Bergdahl and his captors started walking towards the chopper. At the same time, 3 U.S. commandos in civilian clothes moved to meet them. Brief waves and handshakes were exchanged. The Americans hurriedly checked Bergdahl for explosives and then quickly walked him to the helicopter. One of the soldiers took a plastic bag from Bergdahl's left hand and casually dropped it to the ground. The former captive was patted down a second time and then hustled aboard the Black Hawk. Just 40 seconds after U.S. troops first put their hands on Bergdahl, the chopper lifted off. And on the tape, supplied by the Taliban, appeared this closing message: don't come back to Afghanistan.
The Taliban clearly views this as a victory and is now trying to use it to win more supporters. It's notable, Maurice, this piece of highly produced propaganda was put together and presented to the public in less than 4 days.
Bob Orr in our Washington newsroom tonight, and Bergdahl remains in a U.S. military hospital in Germany tonight. In the meantime, we've learned more about his service record in Afghanistan in the months before he was captured. Margaret Brennan is at the Pentagon.
When he was captured, Bergdahl had less than a year of military service, and his official performance record was without blemish. But an internal military investigation conducted after his 2009 disappearance found that he had wandered off post without permission at least once before. Yet his unit members failed to report it. Fellow soldiers told investigators that Bergdahl had talked about wanting to explore Afghanistan and exhibited behavior that some considered strange. Then on the night of June 30th, 2009, Bergdahl neatly stacked up his equipment and walked off the outpost in eastern Afghanistan. A retired Army commander tells CBS News that in the weeks that followed, military and intelligence operations in the area dramatically increased. Some of those patrols succeeded in eliminating many enemy combatants, but also led to the loss of some U.S. soldiers. One of them was 20-year-old Private Matthew Martinick. He was killed 3 months later on patrol in the same province where Bergdahl disappeared.
He loved his country. He loved his family.
Mother Cheryl Brandis and stepfather Ken Lucioni said fellow soldiers told them their son died while searching for Bowe Bergdahl.
I'm happy he's home. I'm happy for his family that their son is not in harm's way anymore. But now he needs to stand up as a man and be accountable for the actions that he did and what it caused.
Today, Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel said he had not seen any evidence that soldiers had died because of Bowe Bergdahl's disappearance.
And Margaret, if the military does accuse him of misconduct, what might they charge him with?
Well, Maurice, we did learn today that Bergdahl's unit established that he had been captured within 30 minutes of his disappearance. So to be charged as a deserter, you need to have been voluntarily gone from your post for 30 days. So until we hear Bergdahl's side of the story, it's really unclear what charges he could face.
Okay, Margaret Brennan at the Pentagon tonight. Thank you. Today, Bergdahl's hometown of Haley, Idaho, canceled a welcome home rally planned for him for later this month. The town said it cannot safely manage the number of people expected, both supporters and detractors, and people protesting Bergdahl as well. As you know, Bergdahl was released in exchange for 5 high-level members of the Taliban. The president did not notify Congress of their release 30 days in advance, as the law requires. Members are angry about that. So tonight, the administration is holding a closed-door meeting with the entire Senate. Nancy Cordes is on Capitol Hill with that. Nancy.
Maurice, in that meeting, we're told senators were shown a video of Bergdahl in captivity, looking gaunt, having trouble speaking. And administration officials say this video convinced them that they had to move very quickly to free him. Senator Mark Kirk, a Republican from Illinois, said after watching that video, he could understand why it might have moved the president to act. But not everyone felt that way. Florida Republican Marco Rubio came out of the meeting, and he said he still does not believe that releasing these Guantanamo Bay prisoners was in U.S. interest, and he still doesn't believe that the U.S. was justified in going ahead with this without notifying Congress.
Okay, Nancy Cordes on Capitol Hill. We'll see what happens when they all emerge. Now, after seeing the reports of Bergdahl's release, an American family has gone public with its own story, releasing videos showing a couple missing in Afghanistan since 2012. The videos appear to show Caitlin Coleman and her Canadian husband, Joshua Boyle, in captivity. It's not clear when or where they were made. Tonight, there is more severe weather heading east from America's midsection. Powerful thunderstorms have popped up from Missouri to Kentucky. Vicente Arenas is in St. Louis tonight. Vicente.
Maurice, tornado watches have been posted in 7 states, including right here in Missouri, where some people are expecting another rough evening. The system dumped more than 5 inches of rain in parts of Nebraska, and packed winds powerful enough today in Kansas to push more than 50 rail cars off the tracks. Hail pelted 4,500 cars at this dealership near Omaha, causing millions of dollars in damage. Some areas reported hail the size of baseballs. Ben Miller is a meteorologist with the National Weather Service.
There was several complexes of showers and thunderstorms that developed across the Nebraska area and kind of congealed into a bigger system that tracked southeast into southern Iowa and northern Missouri and then on into Illinois.
The cluster of thunderstorms stretched across more than 240 miles with wind gusts approaching hurricane strength. And more storms are in the forecast. The National Weather Service is saying the greatest threat could be in the Ohio and Tennessee valleys, where there could be damaging winds and hail.
Vicente Arenas in St. Louis tonight. Thank you. Tomorrow, General Motors will make public the results of its own investigation of how it responded to a deadly defect. Specifically, why it waited more than a decade to recall more than 2.5 million small cars with faulty ignition switches linked to at least 13 deaths. Jeff Glore spoke to one victim's family.
What do you want to see in this report?
The truth.
Rhonda Erickson's son Michael, a father of 2 young children, died in November 2004. He was riding in this Saturn Ion when the car went off the road in the middle of the day in Texas. There were no skid marks. There was no obvious cause. His fiancée, Candace Anderson, was driving.
The car went up this way and off into the brow right here.
The airbags did not deploy. Anderson was thrown through the windshield and barely survived.
You didn't just deal with the injuries, you dealt with an investigation.
The emotional guilt. All these years, it's been a question if I was at fault for his death, and I've carried it for so long.
Anderson did have a trace amount of anti-anxiety medication in her system, but no other drugs or alcohol. She was charged with manslaughter and pleaded guilty to criminal negligent homicide. She spent 5 years on probation.
You're a convicted felon.
We live in a small town. When something like this happens, everyone knows. So every part of my life has been affected from it.
Late last month, Candace Anderson learned Michael's was one of the 13 deaths GM has linked to a faulty ignition switch. She only found out because Michael's mother contacted the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, and they confirmed it in this letter.
Has GM said anything to you?
No.
Do you want them to?
I think they owe me an apology. They can't give me my son back, but I mean, they could at least give me an apology.
Erickson believes that Candace's record should be cleared because the car was defective. Both are hoping to get more answers from this report that's out tomorrow morning. GM CEO Mary Barr will speak to employees first, then reporters. Maurice?
Jeff Glore in Detroit. There is breaking news tonight from Los Angeles. Donald Sterling's lawyer says Sterling has agreed to sell the Clippers and will drop his lawsuit against the NBA. The league banned Sterling for life over racist comments he made. Former Microsoft CEO Steve Ballmer has agreed to buy the team for $2 billion. President Obama is in Brussels tonight for meetings with the G7. Earlier today in Warsaw, he marked the 25th anniversary of the end of communist rule in Poland. He tried to reassure Ukraine that the U.S. will work to prevent Russia's influence from spreading again. Bill Plant is traveling with the president.
After investing so much blood and treasure to bring Europe together, how can we allow the dark tactics of the 20th century to define this new century?
The president said Russia's annexation of Crimea in March was the work of a corrupt regime, and he called Ukrainians today's heirs of the Polish solidarity movement who must be allowed to determine their own destiny.
We will not accept Russia's occupation of Crimea or its violation of Ukraine's sovereignty. Our free nations will stand united so that further Russian provocations will only mean more isolation and cost for Russia.
President Obama met today with Ukraine's president-elect, and he suggested that further sanctions against Russia are possible if it doesn't stop meddling in Ukraine. And Maurice, the Ukraine issue also topped tonight's meeting of the G7 leaders here in Brussels.
Bill Plant with the president tonight. Thank you. A lot of people are betting on this champion to lift a sport out of the doldrums. Today, California Chrome drew the #2 post position for Saturday's Belmont Stakes. After running away with the Kentucky Derby and the Preakness, the horse is one win away from the first Triple Crown in 36 years. Michelle Miller reports that would be a much-needed boost for the sport.
California Chrome may be the only one in Belmont Park who doesn't understand the pressure on his chestnut shoulders. Trainer Art Sherman does.
It took me 60 years to find one like him.
The sport is hurting. Since 2004, betting at tracks has dropped $4.2 billion. And in New York State alone, attendance is down 20%. The image of horse racing has been tainted. Scandals over steroids and race day medication and competition from casino gambling have left the sport reeling. Hall of Fame jockey Gary Stevens says this sport needs a hero.
Right now he is a rock star, but if he doesn't win the Triple Crown, he's just going to be another statistic. I don't know, I've got fingers crossed.
Chrome has not just been lucky, he's been remarkable, especially considering his humble backstory. Owners Perry Martin and Steve Coburn are paupers in the sport of kings. Martin runs this medical testing company in the suburbs of Sacramento. Coburn works at a factory that makes magnetic strips for credit cards. It cost the team $10,000 to breed the mare that produced Chrome.
People spend millions and millions of dollars buying horses, putting them through training, and have never done anything that we did our first try.
Father and son co-trainers Art and Alan Sherman are both former jockeys, but the closest either got to racing glory was when Father Art was an exercise rider aboard the Derby winner Swaps. That was in 1955.
Will he put fans back in the stands?
I think he already has.
Many race fans believe California Chrome can't be touched. And Chrome might agree.
He got rolling.
Chrome is currently the 3-5 favorite here at Belmont, but Maurice, this track
is 1.5 miles long, the longest of any of the 3 races here, and this is the track that's called the Graveyard of Champions.
That it is. Michelle Miller with the Reflexes tonight at Belmont Park. Thanks so much. Well, it turns out nothing will interrupt the Queen's speech, and we'll prove it in just a moment.
Members of the
In Hong Kong tonight, tens of thousands held a candlelight vigil to remember the victims of China's crackdown on pro-democracy protesters in Beijing's Tiananmen Square 25 years ago today. China's communist leaders sent in the tanks, putting a violent end to weeks of peaceful protest. 2 weeks earlier, as the world watched CBS's Dan Rather in Beijing, the Chinese pulled the plug on the last American television coverage of the protests. But on June 4th, 1989, correspondent Richard Roth was able to describe the slaughter in the square to Bob Schieffer, live via cell phone.
You hear that gunfire?
We do hear it.
Okay, we've got to get out of here. We're trying to move back and move away. Oh go!
Roth dropped the phone when a soldier punched him.
Hello, this is New York. Does anybody hear us?
Roth and cameraman Derek Williams were arrested. They were released 20 hours later. Well, Queen Elizabeth opened the new session of Parliament today, arriving in style in a new $4.5 million horse-drawn coach. As the Queen was reading her speech, a young page boy fainted just a few feet away. Prince Charles and his wife Camilla seemed concerned. How did the Queen react? Have a look and a listen.
It will work for a successful transition in Afghanistan and will work towards a comprehensive nuclear agreement with Iran. The United Kingdom will lead efforts to prevent sexual violence.
You might have heard that thump. We're not sure the Queen did, though, but she kept reading as if nothing happened. By the way, we're told that the boy is just fine. And we'll be right back. As we mark the 70th anniversary this week of D-Day, fewer and fewer of the men who made up the Allied invasion force survive. Tonight, Mark Phillips tells us about one man's mission to make sure future generations know the story of one of freedom's greatest victories over tyranny.
What time of the day was it?
6:30.
It's been 70 years since Charlie Wilson was on Utah Beach, where he landed in the first wave with the U.S. 4th Division. Then the object wasn't to take in the scenery, it was to take France.
You didn't spend too much time here.
The point was not to stay here.
That's right. Get off this daggone beach and get out of here. And never look back.
He was an 18-year-old kid in a tank then, which makes him 88 now. This is his first trip back.
I was scared to death. And I was shaking. And I was wondering, are they going to kill us? But we were trained to do it swiftly and surprise them and outsmart them. And we did a good job.
It's been 70 years since you've been back. Why'd you wait so long?
I couldn't afford it. I was a school principal, and when I retired, I was only making $19,000.
Charlie helped the French then, and they've helped him now.
As we get going in, we want it to be a secret.
The French government paid his way so that he could tell his story here to the grandchildren of those he helped liberate.
My tank was the first one off of the ship that I was on.
To them, Charlie Wilson is history in the flesh. To him, their freedom is what he fought for.
I'm proud to be here to help see what has happened.
And they said Julie LaDutte were proud of him.
I will always remember his emotion. It was really, was breathtaking.
Charlie came here with a group of high school students from his home state, Kentucky. You don't get history lessons like this at George Rogers Clark High in Winchester, said Montana Palmer.
If we can't show this kind of respect to someone who is willing to lay down their life for people they don't even know, then I don't know what kind of respect that we can give people.
I wonder if you can.
Charlie Wilson got plenty of respect here, honored at a commemoration attended by thousands.
Thank you. We will never forget.
I didn't think I deserved it, really. All veterans are my heroes. I'd still go back today if I had to, because I'm still, any kids around here, I could still kick butts if I had to.
Like he did then. Mark Phillips, CBS News on Utah Beach.
And that is the CBS Evening News for tonight. For Scott Pelley, I'm Maurice Dubois. Thanks for joining us. Have a good night.